Criminal Border First Offense is a visual novel developed by Purplesoft, who developed things like Chrono Clock, Amatsutsume, and Kunado Chronicles. However, in an interesting twist, the main writer was the one who wrote things like Nanairo Reincarnation, Kimagure Temptation, but most importantly, the 9-9 series, which also happens to be episodic just like Criminal Border. As said in the title for this video, the best way I can describe Criminal Border First Offense is that it's an immoral, wholesome, psychological thriller visual novel. The premise is quite unique, with the main protagonist, Itsuki, being a very typical super shy loner nerd protagonist with no confidence. At the way beginning of the visual novel, he makes this really bad anime music video, or AMV. However, through this AMV, he created an accidental weird creation. When you watch to the end of this AMV, you suddenly get unreasonably, uncontrollably horny. You then basically get in a trance where you basically have to get off in some way, whether it's through masturbation or sex, and it's through this weird high that the name for it became the digital drug. This is the type of shit you can't make up, and it's the type of setting that's perfect for an eroge visual novel. When the main protagonist finds out about this digital drug by accident, his immediate first thought is to try it out on his childhood friend, enemy, frenemy, aka Rin, who lives next door. Despite how long they've known each other, Rin has basically been almost nothing but bitchy to Itsuki, calling him really derogatory names like how much of a nerd he is and how unconfident he is. So his idea was to get her uncontrollably horny so he could attempt to do something like rape her, just to get back at her. All this happens in the first 15 to 30 minutes of the visual novel and only gets crazier from here. After this attempt of the digital drug on his childhood friend Rin, she understandably gets really pissed off, but things go in a really unexpected direction where she essentially attempts to get Itsuki to use this newfounded accidental digital drug and attempt to basically start what I like to call AMV trafficking. Basically, the idea is to get any males or females that are potentially really interested in getting horny, having some of the best primal sex ever while being in a daze. The fact that Rin is so willingly able to basically think of using something like this digital drug in order to gain money shows how far deep she is into immoral territory. As I just said, keep in mind this all happens within the first 15 to 30 minutes of the visual novel and only gets crazier. I'm not going to say any more on specific plot details since it would be spoilers, and I think those will be much better experienced for yourself. Despite the hilariously realistic aspect of an AMV causing uncontrollable horniness, the rest of the visual novel is surprisingly down to earth and gritty. Despite how good some characters seem on the surface, many characters choose or are forced to do things that are borderline criminal, which I guess is where the main title of the visual novel comes from. Even the digital drug that Itsuki created by accident is technically not considered a crime, since anyone would have to consent to watching it first after being told what's happening to them. But of course, the potential implications after the deed is done and who people may do it with are cause for potentially dark stuff. The visual novel is also quick into getting into the detail of how this digital drug is to be consumed by other people, who is allowed to watch it, and most importantly, how much money could be made off of it and how to pay off other people who are taking part of it. People who may know me think I'm just a brain-dead moege slice of life fan, but I'm always down for a good psychological thriller, and to me, this is one of the most excellently paced ones I've seen in the visual novel medium to date. Seeing the main protagonist, Itsuki, slowly descend into a lot of borderline crimes that he has to contemplate being into is quite fascinating, and it really helps you get immersed into the story. It doesn't dwell too much on any particular scene, not moving too fast or too slow. It allows the big reveals and, quite frankly, fucked up shit to linger just long enough, but also having surprisingly good, slower moments. This leads into the other part of the title of this video, which is the surprisingly wholesome nature of the story. As this is an episodic visual novel similar to 9-9 by the same writer, it's going to be similarly mainly focused on one heroine per episode. This time, it's going to focus on a character named Hina Yoruzuriya. She is a popular, energetic, kind of dede girl who's surprisingly nice to the main character and sits next to him in class. The two bond together very early on, and she ends up being one of the main drivers for Itsuki to be part of the plot. She may be very nice to him, honestly in a potentially too good to be true kind of way, but Hina has more than enough depth to make me quite like her as a character, and she definitely fits the setting once you get to know what her real motivations are. Any wholesome Moige-ish interactions revolve around her and end up being a surprisingly great change of pace after you've gone through a whole bunch of fairly dark psychological parts of the rest of the visual novel. Speaking of which, despite the name of the visual novel being called Criminal Border and with the nature of a digital drug putting you into a trance to becoming uncontrollably horny, all of the H scenes with the main girl are surprisingly vanilla, and even more surprisingly, most of them actually have character and plot development within the scene. In fact, one very positive thing I can say about Criminal Border First Offense is that absolutely none of the sex scenes have unnecessarily stupid shock value rape scenes, looking at you, Nitro Plus, clock up, and sadistic blood and stuff like that. The sex stuff at best gets mildly fetishy, with a minor character with a femdom fetish shown in a comedic SD being one of the weirdest that gets shown off. That said, that's not to take away from the dark nature of this digital drug causing horniness, because there's a lot of psychological dark stuff people are willing to do. The character motivations of doing what they can to experience it in any way, at least to me, feel relatively realistic, especially when you consider the type of people that Itsuki tends to be around. Outside of Hina, the main girl's nice personality being a little bit too good to be true, the only real flaw I have with this visual novel are minor nitpicks at best. While I like the really unique art style, I'm not super into making almost all the main girls' boobs way too unrealistically big. While I think the main character Itsuki and the main heroine Hina go through an excellent character arc that's relatively self-contained in the story, at the end of the day, this is still an episodic story, and by the end, you are left with something of a cliffhanger of a larger scale plot. However, these flaws do not take away from how much I surprisingly really enjoyed Criminal Border First Offense. On full auto read, it took me about 14 hours to read, and I loved it from start to finish. Quicker readers I've seen finish it closer to between 5 to 8 hours. I know many people don't like to start incomplete stories, and sometimes even I can fall into this, but I loved Criminal Border First Offense so much that I heavily recommend people try it out, especially when you consider the nature of how visual novel translations work out, since Shirobune has a tendency to release a lot of visual novels per month, and it would be a shame if, due to low sales and low ratings, that we never get anything past episode 1 translated. As a quick reminder that the Steam version is actually called Liminal Border. I'm guessing this is a failsafe just so the title would not get banned on Steam. One last thing I want to talk about is that there's a kind of controversial line where at the way beginning of the visual novel, Rin calls Itsuki, the main character, an incel in the translation specifically. I can understand the complaints since some people online do overuse the word incel. That said, the main defense I can give to this line is Rin does have the personality of the type of people who overuse the word incel online, and considering the context of why she called Itsuki that, well, it kind of makes more sense in context. As this is an episodic title, I'm not going to go much longer or deeper in this review, so hopefully what I've talked about so far is enough to help you consider reading this visual novel. I personally gave it a 9 out of 10, with honestly the only thing holding it back is that it's episodic. But outside of that, if you have any questions or comments about Criminal Border First Offense, feel free to leave a comment below.